He was there, sitting still, the room filled with an almost palpable tension, barely breathed. And then it happened. When no one expected it, he made a strange gesture with his hand, slow, precise, almost rehearsed. And right afterward, he smiled. But it wasn't just any smile, it was one of those that freezes you inside, a smile that didn't fit the scene nor the moment. There, in the middle of a trial for a brutal murder, that man seemed at peace, or worse, satisfied. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a warning, a deadly secret. It just revealed itself, but no one understood what it meant. Perhaps it was just a tick, an involuntary movement, or maybe a symbol, a hidden message that only those who knew his codes could decipher. But in that instant, few realized the weight of that gesture. Few noticed that behind that simple movement, something much deeper and more dangerous was concealed. A silent key to a mind that no one has managed to fully comprehend to this day. What you're about to discover might surprise you. Stay with me until the end, because this story shakes everything we know about criminal behavior. When we talk about criminal psychology, we often imagine traumas, impulses, deviations in behavior. But this case, it's different. There are no screams, no desperate confessions. What exists is silence, a silence that speaks, a gesture that repeats, a smile that provokes, and a sequence of events that challenges even the most experienced investigators. How can someone hide so many layers of intention behind a simple hand movement? What kind of ritual is this? What was he trying to communicate at that moment? Some jurors described the moment as inexplicable. Others said they felt chills, as if they were facing something that shouldn't be seen. In that courtroom for a few seconds, no one could move. And this paralysis, this vacuum of action, became the beginning of one of the most mysterious and baffling investigations in contemporary criminology. Because everything that came afterward, the interrogations, the psychiatric evaluations, the reenactments, seemed to revolve around that single image, a hand that moves and a smile that remains. Have you ever experienced something like this? Seeing something that seems small, but leaves you uncomfortable for hours, as if there was a truth there that your brain caught, but your conscious mind couldn't process yet. This is how experts describe that moment. An instant of dissonance, where the body communicates something that words could never convey. A detail that separates the criminal from the monster, the manipulator from the insane, the ritualist from the impulsive. And this is exactly what we will explore now. What did that gesture truly mean? Some experts tried to decipher that gesture as a behavioral code. Others associated it with little documented ritualistic traits in criminal profiles. But no report could translate the sensation that movement caused in those watching. It was as if the murderer was communicating with something or someone beyond that place. As if everything had a secret script that only he understood. And this unsettles us, because we realize that many times evil doesn't scream. It simply smiles. And that smile, when accompanied by silence and enigmatic gestures, is more frightening than any explicit threat. That city was not known for violence. Small, quiet, with tree-lined streets and neighbors greeting each other at the bakery, it seemed immune to the kind of horror only seen on distant news outlets. But everything changed on a Wednesday night. The body was found in the guest room of an apparently ordinary house in a neighborhood where doors were still left unlocked during the day. The victim, a respected, beloved literature teacher with a life devoid of major upheavals. No debts, no known enemies, no concrete clues. What was most unsettling was precisely that. It didn't make sense. And when things don't make sense, they frighten even more. The impact was immediate, not just because of the brutality, but due to the coldness with which it all happened. No signs of forced entry, no cameras capturing the assailant's entrance or exit. Just a note found on the kitchen table with a single word: completed. The handwriting was meticulous, as if written with pleasure. Around the body, objects were perfectly aligned. A small mirror on the floor, facing upwards. The window, slightly open, as if inviting something invisible to enter. And the most unsettling, the total absence of fingerprints, traces, or any evidence common in such scenes. It was as if the murderer had left his mark. Through absence. At the police station, investigators were in shock. This wasn't just a homicide, it was a message. And even though no one knew yet what the content of this message was, the collective instinct said, something is very wrong behind this. Gradually, the city began to change. Curtains started being drawn earlier, doors locked even during the day. Distrustful looks exchanged between neighbors. The routine was contaminated by a silent fear. Because it wasn't just the murder that shocked, it was the way it seemed planned, almost rehearsed. And that touches us in a place that's difficult to name. Now I want to dive even deeper into this issue, because this case didn't only expose a criminal mind, it laid bare something greater, the fragility of the system, the vulnerability of truth, and how easily we can be deceived by appearances. The way the narrative was constructed behind the scenes, from media coverage to investigative decisions, showed how exposed we are to selective revelations. What was omitted? What was forced? Who profits from the mystery? There is a hidden truth behind the crime, and it's not only in the reports, it's in the gestures, the pauses, the details that most ignore, and perhaps above all in the decisions made by those who were supposed to protect. Comment below, there's something that hasn't been said. If you also feel that this story was never fully revealed, he was the kind of person who would go unnoticed in any crowd. An average face, neutral clothing, slow speech. He didn't attract attention or cause discomfort. He worked at a print shop in the city center, always arriving at the same time, greeting the receptionist with a light nod, and having the same bitter coffee, no sugar. Some colleagues said he was reserved, others found him polite. No one, absolutely no one, imagined that behind that mechanical routine lay a universe of silence built with precision. And perhaps that's what scares us the most, the fact that danger doesn't always have a threatening face. Sometimes it smiles and listens more than it speaks. In childhood, there were no records of abuse, abandonment, or explosions of violence. He grew up in a modest home with discreet, affectionate parents. Average school grades, regular behavior, zero warnings. Everything about him seemed to hover between acceptable and invisible. But there were signs, subtleties that only now, after the crime, make sense. The way he avoided prolonged eye contact, the almost obsessive fascination with symmetry, and the peculiar habit of repeating short phrases in moments of silence as if he were programming himself. Small cracks in a facade built to go unnoticed. Could you identify a psychopath next to you? This is the uncomfortable question that lingers after everything came to light. Because what defines this type of profile isn't fury or obvious chaos. It's control, the absence of remorse, of empathy, of hesitation, and the most dangerous, the ability to simulate humanity with perfection. He didn't shout, he didn't confront, he observed, and he knew exactly how to appear harmless. A cold, calculating mentality, capable of studying reactions with the same calm one uses to fill out a spreadsheet. And when he finally acted, it wasn't impulse, it was decision. Now I want to dig even deeper, because understanding the profile of someone like this isn't just a matter of justice. It's a journey that forces us to confront hidden truths about how we judge, how we trust, and even how we ignore signals that seem too small to raise an alarm. Sometimes the transformation happens in silence. The mind adapts, rehearses, calculates, and what seemed like an ordinary life reveals itself as a meticulous facade. It's at this point that criminal psychology meets the backstage of the human mind, and the result doesn't always fit into a report. Write this: the danger can be disguised. If you also felt discomfort thinking about how many people around us might hide versions we never imagined. During the interrogations, no matter the question, the tension in the environment, or the weight of the accusation, he maintained the same serene expression, as if nothing there affected him. But it was in specific moments, when a detail of the crime was mentioned or when the investigation seemed to get too close to the truth, that the pattern repeated itself. A subtle movement with his right hand, sometimes curling his fingers, sometimes tapping the center of the table with an almost imperceptible gesture. And right afterward, the smile, a contained, firm smile, unhurried. as if he were standing before a secret that only he knew, a silent code that became the focal point of deeper analyses. At first, investigators thought it was just a random reaction, a nervous reflex, but as the interrogations progressed, it became impossible to ignore the repetition. He always did it in the same way, to the same rhythm, and the most unsettling part, he never diverted his gaze. It was as if he were testing those observing him, measuring the discomfort of each officer, coldly evaluating their expressions. It became an obsession for behavioral analysts. Some even reviewed hours and hours of recordings just to map out the exact moment when the gesture emerged. And they all reached the same conclusion. It wasn't accidental. The repetition revealed a kind of internal ritual, as if each gesture were an anchor for the sensation of control. A way to reaffirm that, even in custody, even in the face of evidence, he still commanded the narrative. And that was the most disturbing part, because we are used to expecting fear, remorse, denial. But what they found was someone who seemed to be staging something larger, a play where he was both the author and the main actor. The interrogation room in this scenario ceased to be a place of exposure and became a carefully used stage intended to provoke, to manipulate, to mark territory, because the pattern of the gesture was not merely a tick, it was a clue, a sign that there is a ritualistic mentality behind the actions, something that goes beyond the crime itself, a choreography planned to generate impact, perhaps even confusion, but above all reveals how some criminals construct their decisions as part of something larger, a personal symbolism, an intimate theater. And it is at this point that psychology stops seeking only causes and begins to unravel thought structures where each action carries intention, and perhaps even a signature. The first psychological reports arrived surrounded by caution. No expert wanted to stake a definitive diagnosis, perhaps because they realized that this man did not fit the expected patterns. Were there signs of narcissism? Yes, a veiled sense of superiority, a disdain for authority, and a nearly theatrical pleasure in being observed. Were there traits of psychopathy? Clearly. The emotional coldness, the absence of remorse, the subtle manipulation of interactions. But something there went beyond, as if he followed his own logic, as if each gesture, each silence, each calculated pause concealed a code that had yet to be deciphered, a living enigma shaped by a mind operating in the margins of normality. Renowned criminologist Dr. Mauricio Del Valle, a specialist in the behavioral patterns of ritualistic criminals, even stated that the case was not about killing, but about communicating something through death. According to him, the hand gesture was merely the surface of a broader symbolic system, a signature, a message directed at someone or a group. He suggested that to understand the suspect's mind, it was not enough to study the crime itself, but rather the entire theater surrounding it, the objects at the scene, the silence during interrogations, the use of the body as a narrative instrument. Nothing there was by chance. Everything seemed to follow an internal logic that still eluded common understanding. And that is the most frightening point. Because when we talk about crimes, we tend to think of loss of control, momentary explosions, decisions made under pressure. But there was no hurry, there was no anger, there was method. And perhaps a message. The construction of the crime seemed to serve a greater purpose than simply killing. It was as if the murder were merely a means, not the end. A step inside a mental journey built over the years, perhaps decades, which leads us to an essential question. What did he want after all? Who was supposed to understand that gesture? Because when we dive into this type of mentality, we realize how thin the line between madness and strategy can be. There are criminals who act on impulse, but there are others who construct true mental scripts where each step serves a function. And understanding this logic is not only the task of justice, it is a key to preventing such stories from repeating. Because where there is method, there is intention. And where there is intention, there exists a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. At first, everything seemed like noise, disconnected fragments that, in the eyes of a conventional investigation, seemed to be nothing more than coincidences or irrelevant details. But little by little, These small elements began to repeat with disturbing frequency. In the victim's trash can, pieces of a carefully torn letter, leaving no complete words. Inside the cell where the accused awaited trial, personal objects, organized with obsessive precision. The toothbrush aligned with the edge of the sink, the soap always cut in half, the slippers symmetrically positioned under the bed. And on the floor, subtle marks made with a fingernail, circular drawings like unfinished spirals hidden under the mattress. What was initially ignored as a mania or obsessive behavior began to be re-evaluated with a different lens. This might not have been random. It could have been a pattern, a type of symbolic language that no one was trying to decipher. A forensic semiotician even suggested that the elements followed a ritualistic logic, as if the author were following an internal code, her cycle of gestures and signs that, in his mind, had specific functions. They were not just habits, they were part of the process, part of something larger, deeper, that connected the hand gesture, the smile, the choice of victim, and even the organization of objects, a silent communication system but full of intentions. And that's when the question arose that still haunts those involved in the case today. Could this gesture be a part of something larger that no one has perceived? Because if it is, we are faced with a mentality that not only committed a crime, but constructed a symbolic narrative that went unnoticed. And this raises another even more unsettling question. What else might have been overlooked? How many signs were ignored? How many connections were lost between the excess of material evidence and the absence of symbolic interpretation? Perhaps the investigation only followed traditional paths, digital traces, testimonies, evidence, but overlooked the most important, the internal logic behind it all. Because those elements that seemed unimportant carry revealing weight when connected to the psychological profile of the author. They show not only the obsession with control, but also the need to construct a parallel secret narrative where each object has a role, each drawing a function, each silence a meaning. And it is at this point that criminology meets symbolism, the unconscious, and what is often overlooked for seeming too small. But as you've seen so far, nothing in this case seems truly small. Write in the comments. The details speak louder, if you also believe that the ignored clues say more than they seem. Amidst the complexity of the case, a new pattern began. To draw attention, not in the records nor in the forensics, but in the behavior of people around. Neighbors who, days before the crime, used to chat on the sidewalk began to fall silent. A witness who claimed to have seen strange movement at the victim's house vanished without a trace. Another, who supposedly heard a muffled scream that night, moved away weeks later without notifying anyone. The most intriguing thing was that none of these people had given formal statements. They didn't even want to be heard, as if something prevented them, or someone. Informal reports indicated that there was fear, but a fear that didn't come from outside. It was born right there, within the community. Distrustful glances, hushed whispers, doors closing hurriedly. Some evidence, according to the prosecution's lawyers, simply vanished. A security video with a corrupted segment, an object from the crime scene that was never catalogued. And the attempts to reconstruct those moments were always complicated by omissions, contradictory versions, and, most unsettling of all, silences that were too long to be natural. Something was preventing the truth from emerging, as if an invisible layer of protection was being maintained with force. Many saw, no one said anything, and this silence came at a cost. It cost the complete understanding of what happened. It cost justice for a devastated family, and perhaps it even cost the opportunity to prevent something similar from happening again. Because fear, when it spreads like a fog, doesn't just hide reality, it shapes decisions. It alters trajectories. It causes witnesses to become accomplices, even unintentionally. And this is something that criminology still tries to measure. The impact of the collective in the face of an unresolved trauma. The way truth can be pushed under the rug for pure self-preservation. Because understanding this silence is not just a matter of criminal justice, it's about how we behave in the face of danger, about the instinct to remain silent to survive, even if it costs the truth. It's about collective mentality, about how denial can transform into a social ritual, and about how the weight of omission can be more cruel than the act itself. There are revelations that only appear when courage speaks louder than fear, and perhaps in this case that courage was lacking. The gesture was always the same. Light, calculated as if it were already a part of him. A movement of the hand almost imperceptible, followed by a silence that seemed to stretch beyond time. But what seemed simple began to draw the attention of specialists in completely different areas. Linguists, body language experts, analysts of symbolic behavior, all wanted to understand whether it was merely a tic or a camouflaged message, and that's when possibilities began to emerge. Some frightening, others simply impossible to ignore. There were those who said the movement resembled an invocation gesture present in ancient religious rituals. Others saw parallels with signs used by secret cults, where each finger position had a meaning. A bolder criminologist suggested that the gesture was, in fact, a code of response, something rehearsed that could be answered by someone on the other side, inside or outside the courtroom. This raised a disquieting hypothesis. What if he wasn't acting alone? What if this silent theater was part of something larger, more organized, where the murder was just a chapter of an even darker story? This theory, although never proven, left deep marks, because until then the gesture was treated as an isolated element. But when one considers the possibility of coded communication, everything takes on a different tone. The choice of the victim, the alignment of the objects in the cell, the drawings on the floor, the note with a single word. All of this begins to seem like part of a narrative constructed not only to provoke justice, but to send a message to someone. And the most disturbing part, this someone never appeared, was never identified, not even mentioned. Silence once again imposed itself, because the power of symbols goes beyond logic. They touch the unconscious, stir archetypes, awaken ancient fears. And when a criminal uses this to his advantage, he is not just committing an act. He is constructing a psychological experience, something that marks, that remains, that impacts not only the investigation, but the collective perception of the case. And that's where the real mystery comes in, not knowing if we are facing a solitary mind or something greater, carefully hidden in the lines of the gesture. The more the experts tried to decipher his intentions, the clearer it became that he was always a step ahead. Even imprisoned without direct access to the outside world, he maintained control of the narrative. Each new report, each newspaper article, each heated debate between prosecutors and lawyers, everything seemed to revolve around him, just as he wanted. There was no formal defense nor confession, but there was presence, a presence so intense that even his silence seemed rehearsed. He did not answer questions with words, but with pauses, with gestures, with that smile that hovered between mockery and victory. The question that echoed in everyone's mind was simple but devastating. What did he want after all? Attention? Perhaps. The way he organized every detail of the crime, the theatricality of the scene, the symbolic elements, all seemed to be prepared to provoke a public reaction, to be remembered, to leave an impression that wouldn't fade. But some say it was more than that the goal was to plant doubt, create discomfort, disturb the emotional stability of those trying to find answers. And when you realize that a gesture was enough to destabilize an entire system, the feeling is that he won. Power? Yes, but not the traditional direct power. It was a more subtle, cruel power, the ability to turn authorities into pawns in his own game. He managed this without leaving his cell, without a single formal statement. His simple refusal to cooperate was, in itself, a form of command, and each time he repeated the gesture with his hand, it seemed to reaffirm, "I continue to set the pace from here." He was not merely a criminal trying to escape. He was someone who wanted to be remembered for what he did, and even more so, for what he left hanging in the air unanswered, as if the true crime was not in the act itself, but in the continuous feeling he provoked in those who remained. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about crimes that leave a mark, it's not always the brutality that makes them unforgettable. Sometimes it's the psychological impact. It's the way doubt settles in, how the absence of explanation becomes part of the case's identity. And that's exactly what he did. Transformed uncertainty into a weapon, created a legacy of mystery that remains active even as time passes. Perhaps the gesture was the final point of a story he wrote himself, and at the same time, the beginning of a narrative that we are all still trying to understand. Even with the trial concluded, the sentence given, and the papers stamped, the feeling is that something remains pending. The media treated the case as resolved, the legal system closed the files, but those who followed closely, who truly immersed themselves in the details, know that there are gaps that were never filled. The gesture, for instance, was never explained. No expert managed to prove its meaning. No theory was confirmed. And although he was convicted, the motivation remains shrouded in assumptions. His silence remained intact, defiant, as if the truth were there but deliberately out of reach. Some witnesses changed their stories over time. Others disappeared from the networks, moved, avoided any new contact. A crucial exam requested by the defense was postponed so many times that it ended up being archived. And some police officers admitted, in unofficial conversations, that not all evidence was analyzed with the necessary care. It's as if the case had been closed, not because everything was clarified, but because it had already gone too far. Because reopening questions would be like poking a wound that never healed properly. And that's where the discomfort lies. When the system rushes to a conclusion, the truth is left behind. The official narrative holds up, but it is fragile. It has holes that aren't easy to ignore. A closer look reveals contradictions in the timelines, gaps in the reports, and the invisible weight of fear that hung in the air. And all of this points to a question that insists on resurfacing, even after so long. What if the truth is never revealed? What if what lies behind this gesture, this choice of victim, this symbolic structure, remains hidden forever? What do we do with the discomfort of not knowing, of living with the feeling that something fundamental slipped away from us? Because when the truth doesn't come to light, the void it leaves becomes fertile ground for theories, projections, and the fears we prefer not to face. It's in this space that mystery is born. And the more time passes, the more it grows, the more it imposes itself, until the point where we can no longer distinguish what is real from what was created to fill the absences. When justice falls silent, the mystery screams. And perhaps that's why this case still captivates us so much, because it says less about the crime and more about us, and about how much we need to believe that everything someday will be clarified. Comment below. The truth remained in the dark. If you also feel that this case left more questions than answers. If this video has held your attention up to this point, it's because this case also affected you. Comment down below. The gesture has left me in doubt until now if you were also impacted. This shows me that there is someone on the other side reflecting along, questioning, seeking meaning in the lines of this story. If you feel that this content led you down a different, deeper path, please leave a like. It's your support that signals it's worthwhile to continue producing videos like this, full of details, questions, and revelations that provoke, in the best sense. And, of course, if this type of analysis awakens something in you, subscribe to the channel. The idea is to continue on this journey, always with respect, depth, and that touch of provocation that makes us take a second look at what seemed resolved. If you want to know the story of the mystery of the woman who died whispering, then check out this video here. Take a look and we'll see you over there.